Good morning. You guys can hear me okay? I'm really excited to introduce a friend of mine. Welcome to Millionaire Brand Creation. I wanted to introduce you to a friend of mine, Erik Reichstein. Erik is a licensed financial advisor. He works with Edward Jones. And the reason I wanted to bring him on is one of the biggest things as entrepreneurs and as real estate professionals is how do you create a retirement for yourself that is substantial, that creates financial freedom, that creates time freedom that we all crave. And I wanted to bring Erik on because I know he's very well versed in that subject. And I know because you have a Series 7, Series 66, and all these other qualifications, we can't talk directly about products or any of those things. But we're going to do kind of like a broad overview of how people can get wealthy and what are some things they can do today to take those steps to financial and time independence. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Erik. Erik, how are you?
I'm great, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. This is a pleasure to be on with you.
I like the picture of your family in the back. That's very lovely. I like that.
Thank you. That's my pride and joy right there. So that's the reason we do what we do is I always tell people, when it boils down to things, the first things first is family, God and family. As second after that's health, and then the third thing's the money. Because if you don't have the money, you can't take care of the health. If you don't have the health, you can't take care of your family. So that's why we do what we do.
That's very true. So if you can, walk us through a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your story, Erik. How did you get into this industry, and what were you hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking, Mike. So I actually started my professional working career in HVAC, working with my dad back in New York. That's where I'm from originally, Long Island, New York. So my dad ran an HVAC company, and I was always under the assumption that I was going to take over the family business at some point or another. And that's a hard line of work right there. People work their tails off in that industry. And we ran up against some health issues. My dad had rotacuff surgery. I myself had put my head through enough nails and worked in enough attics where my back was starting to bust on me at an early age. And we had a frank conversation in the attic one day, and Dad looked at me over a box of pizza in the attic, and he was like, son, I really think you should consider going to college. So I took his advice, and I said, you're right. Let's go to school and apply myself here. So I wound up going to school for business. I got my degree at ASU in marketing. And after that, I graduated during the height of the 2008 recession, where people with 30 years of marketing experience, let alone a new grad, were having a hard time finding a job. Now, I was fortunate enough because I had grades to be able to intern with one of the highest levels of state office at the time. And so they were in a transition period where I was able to actually go on and work for them full time. That was a blessing. I enjoyed my time there. I learned a ton working for state government. But at the end of the day, my personal goals was to help people. No matter what I did, I wanted to be in service to people. And so after working at it was the Secretary of State of Arizona is who I actually worked for a number of years for one particular administration. After working there, the talk of the town was, hey, when are, state government employees, when are we going to retire? When are people going to retire? And I started getting really, really interested in that concept of, okay, well, how does one retire? What do we need to do? How does that all work? What investments do we need to be looking at? And so I got really involved with that and started studying that. And ultimately, it led me down this path where I found out, you can actually help people do this for a living, which I never really equated with being a financial advisor. I always just looked at them as people who sold stocks and bonds. But at the end of the day, that's our job, is to help people really understand what their goals are, and then build a personalized financial strategy to help you reach those goals. And so once I figured out, hey, that's what I want to be doing, it was a very easy choice for me to pick Edward Jones as the place I wanted to be to help people. So that's how I wound up where I am today.
It's funny that you say that, because I think you and I are very similar in age. And one of the things growing up that always fascinated me is, how do people become wealthy? You know what I mean? How do they go through these concepts
Yes.
and really get to the point of financial independence and time freedom? And the time
No,
freedom
you're
concept,
absolutely right.
there's a little static in the back. Is that you or is that me?
I'm not sure. I think it might be you. Let's see. Is that a little better?
Yeah, that's good.
Oh,
So anyway,
okay.
you know, for me, what always excited me was helping people in their goals and helping them get to the point of, you know, financial independence, basically. I don't know if that could be my
Absolutely.
mic. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
it
ahead.
sounds
Go
like
ahead.
it's on my receiving end here. But no, you're absolutely right, Mike. I think was just in general, how do we help people reach their goals? What can I do for you to help you? Whether it's how can I help you professionally in your business life, personally, whatever the case may be. And I think when it comes to finances, money just always clicked with me for some reason. Numbers just made sense. And I think there's something tangible to money that people understand. I think a lot of people, um, I've heard the saying before, "Oh, I'm bad with money." I don't think there's anybody who's quote unquote bad with money. I think there are people who just make bad choices with money. And so I think it
Hmm.
really boils down to understanding what the behaviors are that we take on a daily basis, and how do we tailor those behaviors to actually help us achieve our goal. And one of the important aspects of that is really just having a strategy, having a plan. Most people, and I get made fun of a lot by my colleagues when I say this, but I tell people all the time, a plan's only a plan if you write it down. Otherwise, it's just a dream, right? And so if we actually have something written on paper, we can go back to that and say, hey, is the next action that I'm taking, is this next behavior that I'm taking actually helping me to achieve what's most important to me? Or is it going against that? And so we can define that very, very meticulously.
So here's a question for you, because obviously people listening in are of all different age groups, socioeconomic standards, etc. How does someone become wealthy over time? Because I always say, give me 10 years and do exactly what I tell you to do, and I will make you $2 million plus and $100,000 a year after that for the remainder of your life with the knowledge I have in real estate. What
Mhm.
what can you tell people about that? What have you seen as far as your high net worth individuals, and what are some of the parallelisms that they have in their asset portfolio?
Absolutely. That's a really wonderful question, Mike. And there are a lot of similarities, I would say, between people who have a higher net worth. And what it boils down to, in my personal opinion, is there's a very simple math equation that equals wealth. And it's your in plus your rate of return is what comes out. And we try to make
Mm,
it more complex than that, but it's really not. It's what am I putting in? What rate of return am I achieving? And when I add that up, is it equating to what my goal is? Okay. And so I think oftentimes we, again, try to overcomplicate that equation. But what I tell people is that equation, the rate of return portion of it, is often the most complex in the sense that it's hard to break down conceptually in your mind. That's where a financial advisor like myself or a registered or advisor can come in and try to give you advice on, hey, this is what you should be shooting for as far as the rate of return is concerned. But the hardest part of that equation, if you ask me personally, is the in portion, right?
hmm.
And so even going back to where I started from, which was watching my dad bust his hump doing HVAC in 120-degree attics. He would come home, 3 o'clock, 3:30, just to see me for a little bit, and then he'd go back out and do jobs. That's the kind of work ethic that it takes. People think that the rate of return portion of this is ultimately the silver bullet that's going to get them retired, independently wealthy. And don't get me wrong, it's an incredibly important aspect of this equation, but it's not the sole important factor there. Really, it's your hard work. What are you putting in right, to make this happen. And from what I've seen across the board, all of my wealthiest clients, these are not people who have inherited a ton of money. These are people who have worked their tails off. In fact, some of them have failed tremendously to start off and then ultimately learned from that failure, put in the work, and kept grinding. And then as a result, they've been able to build up their wealth.
Yeah, there's a quote that really resonated with me, and I believe it to be 100% true. I think consistency always beats genius. Meaning, if you do the same thing every day of your life for the rest of your life, you are going to achieve financial independence far faster than you thought. And the reason I say that is because I did it from age 22 to 27. And it was those 5 years that I literally, the concept of you delay gratification to get a much bigger payout at a later date. And I think that's kind of what you teach. Can you shed some light on that?
Like, there's and something that I've always appreciated about you is you take information, and I do the same thing. You take bits and pieces of information from different people who you respect, right? You maybe not don't agree with them on completely everything, but you take bits and pieces as you can, and you try to put those pieces of the puzzle together to see what works best for you and what you're trying to accomplish. But at the end of the day, I mean, you go back to even just a book as simple as Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and you could say, look, I can buy one of two things, right? I work so hard for my money. Again, going back to the in portion of this thing, right? I work so hard for the in portion that I can take that in portion and I can either buy something that's going to make me money over time, or I can buy something that's going to cost me more money over time. And so the question becomes ultimately, which one is it that you need to buy? Not only that, but I even think you start to look at liabilities a little bit differently, right? Because if you can turn your liability into an asset, for instance, right, like clothing doesn't make us any money, but the way that we dress obviously, you know, imparts some sort of, thought about who we are as a person to other people, right? If we're looking at it from that aspect, right, I think that it's not that we're justifying spending money on liabilities. It's that we really are truly in every action that we take and behavior that we make working towards that out portion of the equation. Does that make sense?
100%. I think it's all intertied, and you gotta understand every decision that you make throughout the day has something to do with, am I living for today, or am I planning and preparing for ultimate success tomorrow? And sometimes that equation's hard to really deal with, because in the beginning you want to enjoy today, you should enjoy today with an eye toward, okay, what's my future going to be by taking this action today?
You're 100% right. And I think it boils down to balance, right, Mike? Because something that oftentimes, a lot of us, I think, tend to struggle with is there's three components to money, right? There's the in portion, the save portion, and the spend portion. And there's got to be a balance, right? I mean, I think a lot of us, something that I truly believe, I'm a Christian, and I think that happiness is something that a lot of people tend to say, oh, if I could just be happy all the time, happy all the time. But let's be realistic. We can't be happy all the time. And not only that, I don't think we were intended to all be happy all the time. It's about a comfort, a balance, an inner peace with yourself and God, or whatever higher power you might believe in. But I think at the end of the day, the concept here is that can we find balance not only personally, professionally, but also with our wealth?
So here's a question for you. I know you hear this word a lot, buzz term, diversification. What does diversification mean to you, and how can listeners be more diversified in their asset portfolio moving forward?
Absolutely. I'll break it down as simple as possible as I can for you, Mike. If I gave you the choice and I showed you two elevator banks, okay, and you can just picture this in your mind. You've got two elevator banks, and one elevator bank is being held at the top by one cable, and you got a second elevator bank held by five cables. Not a trick question. Which elevator bank would you rather take?
Five, obviously.
5, right? Because if that one cable gets cut, you know that things aren't going to be looking too good for you. If you've got 5 and one of those cables gets cut, you know you've got 4 other cables supporting you. That's diversification in a nutshell, right? It's let's not take all of that hard-earned income I earned and put it into one thing that could possibly fail. Let's spread it across a few different, we call them asset classes, right? So these are different types of investments or securities, and we're going to use different, not just different companies or different properties or whatever the case may be. We're going to use different types of investments to build our wealth. So that way, in case something isn't working, then we can easily make some adjustments and pivot to something else. Or we at least have that and we're not seeing all of our wealth complete in one shot. So that's diversification in a nutshell.
So if you can, I mean, obviously you can't give recommendations or anything of that nature. But the question I have is, if you were dealing with an 18-year-old who just started their first job, or a business owner that's looking to reinvent themselves in today's marketplace, what type of diversification should they be looking at for their portfolio?
That's great, Mike. So ultimately, what we primarily deal with as financial advisors is we're talking about some level of equity ownership. That's typically where you're owning shares in companies or shares in property or something along those lines, as well as some ownership of fixed income type of investments. And you're typically talking bonds or cash, something along those lines. And what we do is when you see or meet with a financial advisor, personal financial advisor, which I would recommend for virtually everybody across the board. I think there are a lot of people who think, oh, I don't need to see them. They cost too much, whatever the case is. At the end of the day, this is what our job is to help not only you understand what your own comfort level for risk is, but also what your ultimate goal is and the time horizon for reaching that goal. And then what we do is we extrapolate out how much time do I have? How much risk am I comfortable with taking? And then utilize that to formulate a plan, a strategy of, hey, how much should I be using of each asset class to achieve my goals? And again, we're not investing or recommending that based on the proverbial crystal ball. I don't have one. I don't think most people do. This is based on a process that we've had for about 100 years now at Edward Jones, not predictions. And so I think that's important to understand, is to invest with principles, not predictions. And meeting with a financial advisor to understand what that process looks like is very, very important.
I think everyone now has the idea or has a desire of the get rich quick mentality. And they think, okay, if I take an exorbitant amount of risk and it hits, then I will be obviously very wealthy. But what they don't realize, and this is what I try to teach people myself, is I don't want to get rich quick. I want to get rich for sure. How do I take as much risk out of it as possible? And how do I create wealth indestructibly to the next level? And to me, there are 3 levels of wealth, and I want to hear what you think about this. The first is earned income, obviously. You're trading time for money. And earned income, the majority of Americans are on that level. And secondly, once you have earned income, where people fail and where I became the best at, for me, Erik, I had a really bad time with earned income, but I had an amazing time with creating excessive passive income. So what I did is I converted all of step 1 into step 2 as quickly as possible. And what step 2 is creating multiple, dependable, monthly passive income sources for your family and yourself. And those monthly income sources can come from a variety of different places, right? They come from real estate, multifamily, residential rentals. They can come from dividends, possibly. It can come from different investment vehicles that pay you on a monthly basis. I think reoccurring monthly revenue is the most desirable revenue on income stream possible. And then last and third, which is what I'm trying to get into even more so, is the concept of once you create a lot of passive income, do you take that passive income and create generational wealth by leveraging your income to create more income? Because as you know, you can leverage three things, right? Time, people, or money. For me, I want to leverage money. If I can leverage my money that I've already made to make more money, that doesn't require time, doesn't require people, right? Leveraging people is
Absolutely.
very complicated because you need a very good process in place to make sure that those people are successful and they're
Yep.
getting what they want out of the equation. And last but not least, leveraging time. Obviously, time is our most valuable commodity, and that's what we're fighting. But can you talk about, we talked about diversification, but can you talk about interest rate risk and talk about how people are leaving opportunities on the table by not chasing, consistent higher returns to grow their net worth?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, especially right now, interest rate risk is a timely risk that a lot of us, are not necessarily considering, especially in the real estate realm, right? You look at interest rates right now, and they're so extraordinarily higher than what we were looking at just a few months ago. And this is something that I think can be very challenging to manage, right? Ultimately, the concept of interest rate risk and what it is again with the concept that in the short term we can't control interest rate risk or interest rates. And I think that's something that you spoke about earlier that's important too, Michael, is just understanding what we can control and what we cannot control. Interest rates are something that we cannot control. We can't control that in the short term. And so we look at that and we go, all right, well, again, what is this investment for? And you're talking about generational wealth. I think that's a really important piece too, right? Something that we help people with is their estate and legacy goals, and understanding what that's going to look like for you personally, and then devising a plan for that. But ultimately, it's again, what are interest rates going to look like in the future? What are they going to look like 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now? And we don't necessarily know 100%. We have a good idea based on our research, right? But I think the idea is let's utilize, let's formulate a strategy that's again based around our goals. And I think I need to be clear about this. Too often, what I hear is, "Oh, I just want to make the most money possible," and that's great. Look, I'm all for making money here. Don't get me wrong, right? But every single one of those people who I talk to who say, "Oh, just make me the most money possible," when push comes to shove, and we really get deep into the weeds about what their personal goals are, they want to make the most money possible for a reason. There's a reason behind everything. And so if we can tie that reason to your strategy, then we don't necessarily need to take the airplane that hasn't been safety inspected just to get to our destination an hour earlier, right? We can let that safety inspection still happen, understand that we're still going to be taking some risk by getting on the plane in the first place, and still achieve your goal. And so I think that planning is important, and understanding what your long-term objectives are, because again, interest rate risk, especially right now, we don't know where interest rates are going to be in the next 6 months or so, especially if you're investing in real estate, right? And you're using leverage. Right now you're looking at the market going, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to, borrow for a much more expensive price than I was paying just a few months ago. Do I do that, or do I wait, or what do I do?" And there are definitely some things that we can do. It's just, again, dependent on what your goals are, and we'd have to take a look at that. But that's something that I talk about with people pretty much on a consistent basis.
I think it's important too to understand the emotions of investing. Ironically enough, so many people invest when there's that FOMO mentality, right? The fear of missing out. Things are going great. Oh, I missed the boat. It's time for me to get in. And they don't invest when they should be investing, right? Like times like this right now in the market, the fear gauge is so high and everyone's so afraid of the stock market. Now, like when I make my Fruit Loops in the morning, I'm like, I'm going to just throw a couple $1,000 into 3x levered S&P 500 and NASDAQ funds Because for me, it's kind of like the concept of if everyone's getting out, that means it must be the right time for me to get in over the long term. Can you talk about emotions and how to understand and deal with significant loss in the short term and how to override that emotionally for a long-term objective?
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up. I think the important thing to remember is that the economy works cyclically, right? And people tend to have this, for whatever reason, mindset where they look at their portfolios, especially in the short term, and they see it lose value and they go, oh my gosh, when is the bleeding going to stop? This thing is going to go down to zero. What are we doing, right? Especially when it comes to stocks and bonds. And that's because with stocks and bonds and even real estate, any one of these types of investments, there's no guarantee, right? And I think that's what we struggle with sometimes, is understanding that there's no guarantee when it comes to investing. We're taking a risk. But if you can assess that risk and then go, okay, well, I know that over the last 100 years, this is what the stock market has done. This is what the bond market has done. And then, use the thought process of, okay, maybe history doesn't repeat itself, but man, it does often rhyme, right? Like, I mean, even what we're going through right now, you look at the early 1970s just as a great example, and you could say, all right, in the early 1970s, we had Vietnam, we had an oil embargo, and we had the Nixon impeachment. So political scandal, we had high oil prices, and we had war. Sounding pretty familiar to what I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen moving forward. Remember, past performance is no guarantee of future results. But I think the idea is we buy stuff off of Amazon with less like reviews and time span of certainty of how those products are going to work than we do of our understanding of how the stock market has worked over time. And so if you look at the historical return, you can then again assess it based on what your goals are and say, all right, what's my time horizon for that goal? How much comfort with risk do I have? And then again, know how much of what type of asset class I should be utilizing. And again, I hate to be so generic. I know there are a lot of listeners who are probably wondering, oh, tell me how much stocks I should be in. Tell me which stocks I should be in. That wouldn't be an appropriate thing to do. Again, what we try to do is give advice that's based on your best interest, based on what you're trying to accomplish and what your goals are. And so for me to just give generic advice is not necessarily the right way to go about doing it. It's more about educating you on the process that's going to help you build that wealth over time and ultimately help you get independently wealthy. And I don't know if that quite answers your question, Mike, but I think, at the very least, it's, again, more about what's the history, what's the process, not about pretending like we've got that proverbial crystal ball.
I think what's important too to understand is, you know me well, Erik, and my whole thing is I want to learn from people that are far wealthier than me. And having talked to a lot of those men and women, the one thing that I understand that they realize is we talk about investments all the time. We talk about rates of return. And, they're asking me, what type of rate are you getting basically on your investments overall? And I said, well, overall, my internal rate of return is around 9 or 10% a year. And with my risk level, I feel that's pretty good. I mean, I have a good risk tolerance that's not crazy risky. And they all look at me and they're like, oh, you little peon, you don't know what you're doing. And I said, really? Well, what are you guys targeting? Like, so we're targeting anywhere from 18 to 24% IRRs. And I'm thinking, how are you getting those returns consecutive or consistently? And one of the things that they said that really interested me is they said what people don't understand is they don't understand the concept of asymmetrical risk. Meaning, if I risk $100 over here, and the odds of that going to, let's say, 1,000 is somewhat good, and I make a lot of those different bets, overall, that risk in return is going to be far greater than just me dumping my money into the S&P 500 and hoping, right? And he said a lot of that has to do, or they said, a lot of that has to do with, like you said, understanding financial risk assessments, being around people that understand time horizons, right? and having a lot of liquidity to deal with the downturn. Because obviously when you're making, let's say, private equity investment or real estate investment or business, investments, there's a lot of times, more often than not, being a business owner, I can say, you run into liquidity issues all the time. And so in that respect, many of the high net worth people that I talk to have a majority of their net worth in cash, way more than the common person, right? If you look in today's, middle class, most people have less than 3 to 4 months of savings based on their income. When I talk to gentlemen and ladies, worth in excess of 30 or $40 million plus, they have anywhere from 10 to 20% of their net worth in cash or cash equivalent. To me, that's astonishing, but they understand the concept of I need cash when I need it. I'd rather take less return to create the opportunity for a better opportunity. Can you talk about
And
that? Talk about in general, like how that works with your higher net worth clients?
yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think what they're doing is, again, assessing their output of the equation and going, okay, my goal is to acquire a property in the next 6 months or whatever the case is. And so now we're assessing a time horizon that's very short in nature. And again, we can't control what the stock market or the bond market does in a very short period of time. And so your best investment class, typically speaking, and again, I'm just using generalities here, right? When we're looking at anywhere from a 1 to 3 year time horizon, cash or money market or CDs or somewhere in that realm is going to be your advocate, because that that's going to be there for you to help you accomplish whatever that next objective is. If you're talking about a longer time horizon, right, now we can start to utilize a little bit more risk with our investments, because even in acquiring that property or whatever it is that they're going to be acquiring, that's again a long-term investment. Oftentimes we just try to your point earlier, right, do the kind of get rich quick schemes, right, and say, oh, if I get this and flip this and do this, and that's one of the benefits, I would say, of owning real estate, right, is you can get a smoking deal on a piece of property, whereas the price of the stock is the price of the stock on any given day. So I would say that's definitely a difference between the two, right? But the idea here is that you're looking at that property, even if you are just flipping it in the short term, as a long-term investment, because you're probably going to be going to that next piece of property or whatever the case may be. To your point, it's all about, ultimately, at the end of the day, how do we create that financial freedom and how much risk am I willing to take? Now, I would even argue that a lot of these folks who you're talking about, who are higher net worth clients, are people who are business owners. And that is probably one of the biggest risks that you can take, is owning a business, right? Because now we're talking about your own sweat equity. And if you fail in that business, you're out, right? You're done. And so business ownership is probably one of the riskiest things that you can do, right? But the reward, the yin and the yang of this, right, is so exponentially higher, because you are putting your own sweat equity into it, right? And so just depending on how skilled you are, how valuable you are, right, how hard you work at it, how diligent you are, and ethical, and all of the above, your rate of return could be outrageous, phenomenal with something like that. And so that's where I would just look at that and say, okay, well, I'm actually investing in a business. I'm taking a lot of risk, and sure, the reward could be great by doing that. When we're talking about passive investments, right, to your point, I think that having a very realistic expectation about how those passive investments can be expected to perform is important, right? It's not about trying to time the market. If you try to time the market, most people, from what our research shows, are going to fail trying to do that. Your best bet is to buy good quality investments, hold them for a long time, and to our discussion earlier, diversify. And if you do those three things, we found that to be very effective. That's part of our established process that we follow.
Now, here's something that I know a lot of people don't understand fully, and it's not until you start making a lot of money to where this becomes a big problem. But even people that I know that own large, let's say, positions in publicly traded companies, right? They have capital gains tax. They have a ton of taxes, right? The reason I dump a ton of money into real estate is I love the tax benefits of offsetting rental income with depreciation, right? It's a great income stream that's highly tax advantageous, right? Can you talk about taxes and talk about, in general, how people can make the highest amount of return while also paying the government the least amount over the long term? Because that's huge wealth erosion that I think a lot of people aren't aware of.
Sure, absolutely. Glad you brought that up, Mike, because that's something that I think that when we invest, no matter what the investment is, we tend to forget, hey, it's nice to see what the revenue looks like, but how are we really coming out? What's our actual rate of return after taxes, after costs, right? And so tax mitigation strategies are certainly something that we typically look at in order to achieve the best possible rate of return for you. And when I say best possible, again, it's all relative, right? It's not like, oh, I'm making you 100%. It's no, how can we achieve the best possible rate of return given the comfort level with risk you have in your goal? But aside from that, the idea here is I've heard a lot of people, for whatever reason, especially in real estate, not really loving the idea of locking their money up, so to speak, quote unquote, in a 401k, because they want to have passive income right away, right now. And they don't want to lock that money up until they're, age 59 and a half, typically with that 401k. And I can appreciate that to an extent, but you're missing out on a big potential tax strategy, right? If you own a business and you're able and you're W-2ing yourself and you're able to write off a good chunk of that W-2 or deduct that W-2 because you're investing it for your retirement, well, that's a really ideal strategy to be having, because now you're not only saving your money on taxes with your current passive investments, but you're also investing for your financial future with a retirement plan. So I think oftentimes we miss the boat on strategies like that because we just think, oh, we only need to be putting into passive strategies right now. But that's an important thing that we do as well, which is assessing, again, what your goals are, because we know that there aren't just one. It's not just financial freedom or retirement down the road that's important to you. It's how do I buy the next house, or when do I replace my vehicle, or when do I have to maintain the house, or whatever the case may be. And so we need to start creating buckets and saying, okay, well, I need to have X amount of dollars in the 1 to 3 year bucket, X amount in my 3 to 7 year, and another amount in my 7+ year goal bucket. And by doing that, we can then really define, okay, well, what type of strategies are we using? What expected rate of return can we project on our passive investments? And those numbers aren't arbitrary, the 1 to 3, 3 to 7, and 7+, right? You look, again, all we're doing is using history and saying, okay, well, again, past performance doesn't guarantee future results, but what asset class can I trust in those given time spans to help me come out on top? And what can I reasonably expect from that performance-wise, so that at the end of the day, that in plus rate of return equals out my goal? And I know I've beaten a dead horse with that, but I think too often we just fail to plan, right? And if we have a plan, then it's going to make life a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, I think so many people fail to realize that debt is only a tool if it's used to create more assets and more passive income. And I think what many people run into, especially in times like this where you have financial tightening with higher interest rates, is people's debt loads are too high. And when their debt is too high, and that debt is really not consistent to the amount of income they're bringing in because of that debt, the odds of financial devastation is huge. And to me, it's like, I wonder what type of financial education the common person can learn and or instigate daily in their life to help change the trajectory of their future. Do you have any books that you'd recommend, or any overall arching themes that you'd recommend to help educate everyone on interest and wealth accumulation?
Sure. I think there are two people in general who I tend to gravitate towards. They have completely differing opinions, but they're the two behemoths in the industry, which are Dave Ramsey and Robert Kiyosaki. You know, I've learned a lot by reading Rich Dad Poor Dad. I've learned a lot by reading a bunch of Dave Ramsey's books as well. And again, you can glean a lot of insight from these two individuals, but again, that's very, very generic advice. It's good advice, but it's generic. And so that's why I typically say for the average American, even for our high net worth clients that we serve, there are a lot of complex strategies that we utilize here, right? Especially with our subject before taxes, right? And so really to get that personalized strategy, you've got to go through a lot. There's a lot of school, a lot of education. I mean, Edward Jones, for crying out loud, paid me to sit in my house for 3 months and learn, which was a phenomenal experience for me. But not everybody gets that opportunity. And so that's why you hire a financial advisor to come in and give you that personalized, tailored advice to say, you know what, based on what you're trying to accomplish, here's the best tax mitigation strategy, or here's at least a few options. You don't have to do, one in particular. I recommend this, but just because I'm recommending it doesn't mean it's the only thing you have to do. That's why we give you options, and you get to choose what's best for your family based on the education that I am providing to you. I always tell people at the end of the day, listen to everybody, always have an open mind, try to learn something from everybody. And then when it comes to your money, really go and find that one person who you really trust the most to give you the best advice and information about all the options that are available for what you can do with your money. And as long as you're trusting that education, that person should not be the person saying, you know what, here, do this, 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 and this. And you say, okay, here's all my money, let's fork it over. You go, okay, this is my money. This is great information. I'm paying you because you've got that education and I trust you for the information you're going to be providing me. And I'm going to use that to the best of my ability to create my wealth strategy moving forward.
I think that's a really good point. I think the biggest thing people can do is educate themselves on things that they are aware of and learn before you even distribute $1 in regards to whatever it is that you're investing. And so many people, I think, put money into something they don't fully understand. And in regards to that, they wonder why they get burned or why it doesn't turn out the way that they had hoped. Can you talk about that a little bit?
You just took the words right out of my mouth, Mike, because that's a piece of advice that Dave Ramsey offers that I completely agree with, which is, you don't invest in something unless you understand it, right? And so, again, going back to and the reason why you don't do it is because then you're going to be prone to take behaviors that are against your own best interests. And I'll give you an example. You buy a stock, you don't really understand what it is that you're buying or why you're buying it. You just hope that it's going to go up in value. All of a sudden, you start seeing the stock go down in value and you sell. You're going to sell low. Remember the old adage, buy low, sell high? Well, we're doing the opposite now. And we're doing it because we don't understand what we're in. So you're going to do something that's detrimental against your own best interest if you're investing in something that you don't understand. When you understand it, then you can take the actions, behaviors that are appropriate to help you ultimately achieve your goal. And that's the important thing. So, again, this is where I think tailored advice comes into play, because that's the job of your advisor, is to educate you on, hey, you might not know what a mutual fund is. You might not know what a stock is. You might not know exactly how that particular mutual fund operates or how it's supposed to operate. What the cost is, all of it. And so having somebody on your side to explain that to you, I think is critical.
Now, there's one thing I think I want to educate people, which is assessing IRR, right? Internal rate of return. What is IRR, and how can people do a better job of managing their income and their future wealth so they can retire 10, 20 years from now?
Yeah. So internal rate of return is a projection. It's an idea of, hey, how much am I going to make off of this thing in the future is more or less the simplest way I can break it down. And there is a math equation to it, so I won't get too into the nitty-gritty details about it, but the idea is we're projecting, what is this thing going to do for me moving forward? What I often find is the failure of people when they do these internal rates of return analysis is they don't encompass cost, again, and taxes. And when you fail to do that, you're just looking at the revenue stream of things and you're going, oh, everything's great. This is we're doing awesome, right? Well, are you? Or is there something else that we should be investing in? It might require more capital up front, right? Or maybe less, or who knows? But again, the idea is there might be an alternative strategy that we should be looking at that could potentially perform better for us, net of cost, net of taxes, and looking at this equation, factoring in those concepts, is really going to help us ultimately make the better investment choices.
So here's a question for you. If you had to do it all over again, Erik, having known what you know about finances and having studied probably your clients that are higher net worth, what would you do differently? What would you recommend now today if you're a struggling entrepreneur?
Yep. I think the first thing is know yourself. Know yourself so that you know ultimately what it is that you're called to do. What are you good at? And don't pretend to try to be something that you're not. And I say that with the utmost love and respect that I could possibly have for other human beings. I think too often we look at people and we aspire to be or do or whatever that somebody else is. But you're not that person, you're you. And so you have to understand what is it that you're good at, and then use that God-given ability to your benefit, right? Not only yours, but to God's benefit is kind of how I look at it, right? And I know me as a Christian, it's a little bit different of a worldview than some others might have, but that's always how I'm looking at it is, how can I use the skills that God gave me to his glory and benefit? And when I do that, right, and I try to extend my hand out to other people and help them with those skills that I've been given, right, that's where you can be a beacon in society and try to ultimately be the best that you can. I think one of the important life lessons about money, there's two important life lessons about money that I was taught. One was by my mom. My mom always taught me when I was a kid, don't owe anybody anything. So that was the first lesson I learned. And the second thing was from my dad. And my dad taught me, he would say to me, kid, and he still says it to me, he says, kid, money isn't everything. And he's right. It's not everything, right? It's at the end of the day, it's not your God. So if you can look at it from that angle and say, you know what, I want to do this. And as you're doing it, fail forward. That would be my next piece of advice. Fail forward, right? Because if you do something and you go, man, you know what, that was a bad decision. It doesn't mean that your life is over. It doesn't mean that you're at the end, right? And that's the end of your financial journey. It's just beginning, right? What you've done was you learned an important life lessons, and I've learned them myself, I failed financially. I think all of us have one or phase or another in life. And so, but the important thing is, how do I learn from that mistake? And then how do I persevere moving forward with good knowledge so that I don't make that same mistake again? And two, that I just continually get better as I move on. So that would be my advice.
So if you had to sum up what we talked about today, Erik, in a quote or one piece of advice in a sentence or two, what would you say to the audience?
Invest wisely. I would say be true to yourself. Define what your goals are and define what your strategy is going to be to reach those goals. And if you need help with that, don't be afraid to ask. It's good to seek help, I would say. That would be my summation here.
I like that. Yeah, it's important to have mentors. And it's important to really sponge up as much information as possible before you make a move. Lastly, how can they find you? How can they follow you? If they have questions for you, what's the best way to get in contact with you, Erik?
Appreciate that. feel free to, you can look me up on the Edward Jones website. It's edwardjones.com/Erik-Reichstein is my webpage. You can visit, we've got a Facebook page as well as LinkedIn. The most important thing is call me. I'm very personable, and you can call me, ask me questions anytime. I open my phone lines up all the time. Even if you just have a general question, we don't charge for questions. Just call me, talk with me. Let's have a conversation and see what it is we can help you with. Our phone number here, 480-830-0098. You can either get me or you're going to get my administrator, Kelly, and we'd love to help you.
I'm wondering if anyone has any questions before we leave. If so, can you post them in the question log? And if not, that's okay too. Say your number again, Erik, so if they want to contact you, they can.
Absolutely. Our phone number here is 480-830-0098. You can also email me too at eric.reichstein@edwardjones.com. Either way is perfectly fine. Just feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time, Erik. I really appreciate having this conversation with you. And really, my life goal has always been help educate, empower, and help those become financially and time independent. So thank you for taking that quest on with me. And thank you for taking the time to join us here today.
Oh, absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mike. And hopefully you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye. You too.
Bye.